Mr. Michael Madden. He is the librarian here at Flint Public Library. We've been talking about some history and some politics, and I find him to be very knowledgeable about both of those topics, as well as genealogy. I had a class here for free several years ago. He knows about genealogy, but tonight's topic is firsts, African American firsts in Flint
and Genesee County.
And one of the types of firsts he's going to talk about is African American women who worked in the library field.
Yeah.
I don't know when you're going to get to that, but that's...
Well, I thought we'd start. Go ahead.
We apologize right up front that we weren't thinking that this was the day back from vacation for most people.
Oh, right. Actually, this worked out great. It's a small, but you're a very dedicated group. How's that?
All right.
Okay. What I thought I would do, actually, when I thought about this, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to do women, because I expected certain things to turn out a different way. But since they didn't, we'll still do women. And I thought I would do three women to start with. Marie LeGrand Hackley Wright, which you may or may not remember because her family owned Funeral Home Wrights, an African-American funeral home here in Flint, her and her husband for many years. Then Edith Prunty Spencer, and then Gloria Coles. And all three of them, what did they have in common? At one time, they all worked for the Flint Public Library. So I was going to start with Mrs. Wright first, and then we'll move forward to Miss Coles last. Marie Wright, like all three of these women, none of them born here. They all came here by choice for their career. So Marie Wright's born in Roanoke County, Virginia in 1899. She graduates from college in Richmond, Virginia. Then she goes to Wilberforce. And then she goes to U of M for 1 year. And then she transfers to Meharry, which is a medical college in Nashville. I'm surprised at how many people went to Meharry and came to Flint. And it's not exactly a household name. It's not like Howard. But apparently it was a powerhouse school for African Americans going into the medical. So Marie Wright went there, and she was either the first or the second woman to go through the dental college. So that's your first clue right there. Here is a college run by the Methodist Church for African Americans, and they don't know if she's the first or the second woman. So you see right there how hard it is to tell who's first. So she's either the first or the second. She gets her degree, and she comes to Flint in the 20s. So what happens? Yes, the economic downturn for the automotive industry. Who's going to avail themselves of a black female dentist in the middle of an economic downturn? So, as far as I know, she never practiced dentistry. She was never, as far as I know, she has the credentials, but I was unable to find that she ever practiced as a dentist. So, in 1929, she gets a job at the library. Now, I see in many of the articles they say she was the first African-American professional at the library. They didn't hire her as a librarian. She didn't have a library degree. She worked as a clerk. But I'm sure she was probably thrilled because it was a job. Then, by 1940, she's gone to work for the YWCA in East Orange, New Jersey as a social worker. Now, I couldn't find that she has gone back to college because on the census they only ask you the last year of schooling you have attained, and she's already C6, which means she's gone to college for 6 years. So I have no idea if she went on and got another degree on top of her other two or not. She becomes a social worker. So then she moves back to Flint. And she is a founding member of the Flint chapter of Delta Sigma Theta. In case you don't know, I'll give you the spiel that I've heard from Wanda Hardin. That is not the oldest black sorority, but is the most socially active black sorority. So, right. It's not the oldest, but boy, they're the most socially active black sorority.
So could you tell our two latecomers who you're talking about?
Marie LeGrand Hackley Wright. And you're kind of young, so, but do you remember Wright's Funeral Home?
No, he's not from here.
Oh, he's not from here. Okay, and you're way too
I've heard
young.
about this.
Thank you.
Yeah, there was a right,
But I was
Wright's Funeral Home. Before we ever had Greens
and there was
or
Spencer. There was Spencer.
Spencer's,
Yes,
yep,
there
Miss
was.
Dr. and Mrs. Spencer had a funeral home, and Marie Wright, but they were not the first African American funeral home, and I can't offhand remember because Mrs. Spencer did tell me they were not first, and neither was Mrs. Wright, her husband. There was another one even earlier. But I can't remember who they were. But anyway, so Marie Wright and her husband moved back to Flint. She's worked as a social worker. Now she gets to have her third first. She is the first African American to work for the Michigan Department of Social Services as a social worker. And she's right here in Flint,
And that's in 1940?
1940, right around 1940. No, after 1940, because she was in New Jersey, but when she moved back. So three firsts. She gets to be either the first or second woman to be a dentist from Meharry. She's the first African American to get a job at the Flint Public Library, and that's in 1929. And then she's the first woman to first African American and first African American woman. She gets to be both, to actually get a job at the Michigan Department of Social Services, which is where she worked until she retired. She lived to be just shy of 100.
Wow.
3 months, and she'd have had it. So, yeah. She must have had some longevity there. Her husband, he was 5 months shy of 100. So, no children, but they both lived to be almost 100.
That's why,
So that's the secret.
Oh, none of them had children. That is another thing. Yeah, I never realized that.
They all-
Until you
all
just said
three
that.
of them?
None of these women had children. That's another thing that, yeah, they all have in common. None of these women had children.
But they all mentored.
Yes, and since we talked about mentoring the children, let's talk about Mrs. Spencer, because most people know her for her work with education. Either Jordan College, the United Negro College Fund, she's now the Spencer Fund at the Community Foundation for African Americans to go on to college. So she was really big on education. I did.
Not to run college, it's to support their college. They have to be in college, yes.
Okay, so it's once they get there. Okay.
Oh.
I did. Mrs. Spencer's family is really interesting, so we'll just make a little segue off of it for a minute, because I did a little genealogy on her family. On her father's side of the family, her great grandfather is a free African American before the Civil War. He was freed by his owner, who turned out to be his wife. She was an African American woman who, her father had money and they owned other African Americans. So she owned her own husband. And
So wait, that's one way to go.
anyway, so you find him on the census before the Civil War, and he's a shoemaker.
Okay.
Then after the Civil War, they both live in what later became West Virginia, because Virginia splits. All of their children go to college. And then it says, can you read and write? And both of them can read and write. So that tells me right off the bat there was something going on there, because in Virginia, Frederick Douglass says, you weren't supposed to be able to read and write. Well, she could because she's free, but her husband, either she taught him afterwards or he was in the know before.
Yeah.
So all of her aunts and uncles then go on to college. And all but 2 of them go on and get higher degrees, other than just a bachelor's. Most of them go on and get a PhD, but I think even the women, they go on and get master's degrees. Only 2 of them did not. So Mrs. Spencer came from one of those families that's really, really big on education. So Mrs. Spencer, she goes to Clark Atlanta, and she gets her library degree. And it's not quite like the library degree we have now, where you have to have your bachelor's. She goes and she gets a library degree, like for her bachelor's degree. She goes a little longer than the 4 years, but it's the equivalent. They come to Flint in 1951, and she gets a job, and she is the first African-American professional at the Flint Public Library. She's the first African-American with a library degree hired at the library in 1951. Mrs. Spencer later goes on, and she becomes the first African-American to be the head of the department. When we had departments here, she was head of cataloging.
Yep.
And then she becomes the first African-American to become the head of the, when we had departments, adult services. So that's quite a step up, especially when you consider the majority of library employees are overwhelmingly women, and the majority of library directors up until about 10, 15 years ago were men. And then not only that, they're usually white men. So that's, I think it's really a testament to Mrs. Spencer's integrity and her capabilities that she was able to do this. And when she becomes the head of cataloging here, it's not like Flint is a majority black city, it's not. So they weren't under any pressure to, you know, move her up. So it was from her skill and her abilities. Dr. and Mrs. Spencer later operated Spencer Mortuary from 1955 to 97. Mrs. Spencer is a founding member of Alpha Kappa Alpha, which is the oldest African American sorority, but not the most socially active. So we'll just, she cooperated with Rhonda Sanders on the book Bronze Pillars, and she is super big in the Urban League, the NAACP, Planned Parenthood, Flint Institute of Arts, and she has been on the board of Salvation Army for over 30 years and got a Lifetime Achievement Award. And I think she was only the second person to be given the Lifetime Achievement Award by the Flint Salvation Army. Dr. and Mrs. Spencer were also first for another thing, you may or may not know. Dr. Spencer bought some cemetery plots from someone in Flint Memorial Park. And when his mother died in 1963, that's where they were going to put her. Except, like many property deeds, there was a covenant in there that said no black person could be buried in Flint Memorial Park. And this is 1963.
As if all those dead people give a rip.
Well, that's what I thought. Like, what happened?
It's the living people that care.
Well, my thought is, and I asked Mrs. Spencer, what did they think was going to happen? Right? What did they, is going to leach over, and they were going to be, and somehow, I mean, she said, segregation didn't have to have a reason, and it frequently didn't. She said, when she tells younger people things today, they frequently look at her like she's crazy. Like, who would put up with that? Why would you take that from someone? And this was one of those things like, why would you care, right? So anyway, they sued Flint Memorial Park, and they won in circuit court here in Genesee County. And Flint Memorial Park, I mean, let's face it, now we're in 1964 and the Civil Rights Act has been passed and everything, and you think they would give in graciously. They did not. They took it up to the next level, and Dr. and Mrs. Spencer won again, and the cemetery appealed to the Michigan Court of Appeals. And it's not until 1966, when they go to the Court of Appeals, the chief judge of the Court of Appeals told them that this is really not going to go your way. You can take it to the state Supreme Court. However, this might end up in federal court, in which case you're going to lose. So they backed down, and Dr. and Mrs. Spencer had to disinter his mother and put her, because they had to go out and buy another plot.
Oh, yeah.
Because now it's been 3 years. And then they could put her in Flint Memorial Park. Then cemeteries all over the state said, well, we'll just void these clauses. it was interesting, there were only 3 cemeteries in Genesee County that didn't have those clauses. Glenwood, because if you could afford it, who cares? Right, because it was the cemetery
Yes.
at one time before Sunset Hills, and it was quite expensive, so if you could afford it, they didn't care. And Old Calvary and New Calvary, and they already had African Americans buried there from Christ the King,
Oh.
because they were Catholic and that's where you go. So everybody else had to tidy up their deeds and allow it. So in Sunset Hills case, you now know it's Sunset Hills River Rest.
Right.
Because
You could go to River Rest.
you could,
Yes.
yes, but it was
That's
River
right.
Rest.
Yep.
Catherine Kogel actually did a talk here a couple of years ago, and it was set up so that African Americans, blacks, Negroes, whatever terminology you want to use, you got buried in River Rest, and there was a hedge between the two. Say, okay, a good hedge. And so, if you were African American, you were over here, and if you were white, you were over
So
here.
you can't
And then she said that after the law was changed and everything, her father, because she said her grandfather really didn't much care for it because the same people take care of both parts.
Correct, yeah.
So they just he ripped the hedge out, and they could just keep mowing because so they owned the same thing, you know. So it was just, for them, it made life easier. And I have to think that a lot of times it was probably the people that wanted the lot that made the distinction rather than the people that are actually have to work on it on the ground. And then the last cemetery in Genesee County that kind of gave it up was Evergreen, out by Grand Blanc. So for Mrs. Spencer, we have being the first here, and then I think the bigger one, which had statewide implications, is the cemetery thing, that her and Dr. Spencer had to fight for 3 years to get buried in a cemetery because she was black.
And there were some other things. Wasn't Dr. Spencer up first? On maybe like the Flint School Board?
No, that's further down the line.
Excuse me.
That's gonna be,
Oh. I'm
you're way ahead. That's gonna be Dr. Wendell Williams,
Oh.
Thomas Wendell Williams.
Yes. Well, I know.
Dr. Weaver's dad.
I used to work with Mrs. Spencer when I first came to Flint. I worked with her in the Art, Music, and Drama department, which...
Oh, AMD.
Yeah, AMD. I learned a couple of things as we were sometimes sharing personal information. She actually had a degree in mortuary science.
Yep, she
so
got
that
her master's from Wayne State in
So
mortuary
that she could
science.
assist her husband
Right.
at the funeral home.
And Wayne State is the only college in Michigan where you can get your mortuary degree.
Mhm.
So her and Dr. Spencer both went there.
And they were active in local politics, and I'm pretty sure he was a first something or another, and I can't remember now. I'm sorry, Mrs. Spencer, wherever you are this evening. I don't remember. It's a long, long time ago I heard this. But she was just a lovely person to work with. I remember one of the white male librarians made a derogatory remark, race-based, and she asked me if she had offended this person, whose name I've forgotten. Otherwise, I'd call it. He doesn't work here anymore. She asked me if she had offended him in some way. Well, she hadn't. She hadn't done anything. She was Mrs. Spencer.
That was the offense.
That was the offense, yeah, her very existence in the library, I suppose, as a...
Well, I will tell you that Mrs.
Anyway.
Spencer told me a little story. Back, she worked for the library before this building was built.
Mm.
So when she came, we were still in the Carnegie building, which would be where the theater is for U of M Flint now.
Oh.
And she didn't work in that building though, because cataloging was over on 3rd Street in the office building for the Board of Ed before they built this
Oh.
thing over here on Kearsley Street. But she would be over at the library all the time because she would have to go over and change the cards out in the catalog
Yeah.
because it had to be done right, and she's the cataloger, so she would have to go do that. And they had a young male librarian, and I should say the director was a male, the assistant director was a male, but all of the department heads were women. And they were all unmarried, middle-aged white women, by the way.
Wow.
So they had a tremendous amount of local history material, just like we do now, only they had more then, she said. And this young man, fresh out of library school from Ann Arbor, decides that Flint doesn't need all this stuff. So he's throwing it away.
What?
And
Amazing.
one of the older librarians, Miss whatever her name is, you will not do that. He said, you don't tell me what to do. So he went to the director, who was this extreme, Mrs. Spencer told me Mr. Webb was a Quaker. And he was an extremely gentle man, and he didn't lay down the law. He just merely said, you are new, and these ladies have combined so many 100 years of experience because they had all been there forever. You are to be guided by them and learn from their collective wisdom. He quit. So probably with Mrs. Spencer, it's because it's Mrs. Spencer and she's a woman and she's black. And that's why he figured he could get away with it, because you've got a double whammy going, you know, you're not only black, you're a woman, so what would you know?